Hi, I'm Alan Watt, best-selling novelist and writing teacher. I want to tell you a quick apocryphal story about Margaret Atwood. Somebody told me this one. They said she was sitting at a dinner party and sitting across from this guy, and he said, "What do you do?" And she said, "I'm a writer." "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a brain surgeon. And when I retire, I'm going to be a writer." And she said, "That's interesting because when I retire, I'm going to be a brain surgeon." So the point is, writing is hard work. Margaret Atwood is not just a brilliant prose stylist, she's also a masterful storyteller. This isn't something that she sort of, summoned by accident. She has spent years developing her craft as well as having, this natural talent for prose. So what I want to talk to you about is, I'm assuming if you've come to this video, you are interested in not just knowing what a novel is, but how to write one. So I want to break it down for you right now. The first thing I want to talk about is that there are four essential components to any well-told story. All right, the first one is desire. You have to have a protagonist that wants something. They want something really badly. In fact, they want something so badly, if they don't get it, they will, on some level, die. I don't literally mean die, but I do mean that if Jan Brady doesn't get a date with Tad Hamilton, she will positively die. In other words, the stakes are life and death. If I don't get what I want, my life will be unimaginable. I'm assuming that you might have an idea. All right, so notice where that lives for your story. Second point, conflict, worthy antagonists. If you don't have some kind of conflict or tension, if you don't have worthy antagonists that are in one way or another acting as obstacles for your protagonist, there's not going to be a story. We're not going to know what you're asking us to care about because we only understand character through conflict. That's how meaning gets conveyed. All right. The third part is surrender. All right. And so your protagonist wants something. The stakes are life and death. If I don't get blank, my life will be unimaginable. And now I run up against some kind of obstacle. Because when you think about it, story really is about change in some way. Your antagonists are catalysts for change. What I mean by that is antagonists are not necessarily bad guys. Let's be clear about that. Antagonists are not bad guys. They're catalysts for change. Don't confuse antagonist with a villain. They might be a villain, but you want to make sure that your antagonists are all primal forces, archetypes that constellate around your protagonist's primal desire. What I was going to say was their dilemma, but I'm going to get into that in just a minute. Okay, so this is the third point, is that without powerful antagonists, there won't be a context for what gets surrendered. All right, so that's your third point, surrender. Your protagonist, in order to become transformed by the end of the story, they must let go of the limiting belief that they have about themselves to the world. Okay, so real quick recap, we've got desire, we've got conflict, we've got surrender, and then finally we've got transformation. By the end of the story, your protagonist transformed, and all that means is that they see their situation in a new way. Transformation simply means a shift in perception. Don't confuse it with some vague notion of enlightenment. The transformation doesn't mean that I'm sitting at the top of a mountain with the cool breeze blowing through my gown. It simply means, on the most fundamental level, that I now understand that when I put my desire before my need, it leads to pain. All right? So now let me break that down. I'm talking about desire and need. What I'm really talking about is at the heart of your story lies a dilemma for your protagonist. This is often where writers get stuck. I'm going to do a quick segue right now just to illustrate what I mean. If you're watching this video It's very possible that you have been in a writing workshop. I am going to tell you that you are in one of two writing workshops, and you tell me if I'm wrong. There's basically two kind of writing workshops out there. There's the free writing workshop that, where you do a lot of stream of consciousness writing, and you do a lot of free writing. You find your voice and you share your work, and people hopefully support you in finding your voice. And then at some point, whether it's 6 months or 2 years or 10 years down the road, you start to get this nagging sense that there's not a lot of shape. I don't really have a narrative. There's not a lot of shape to this story that I've been trying to find. Okay? And so many of you probably relate with that. And there's nothing wrong with that workshop. It's a terrific way to get started, except that at some point you start to go, I don't know how to create a narrative with all of these disparate ideas and images that I've got. That's when people often come to me with 700 pages of shapeless work, and I help you create a narrative. Here's the other kind of workshop. There's the very typical Hollywood story structure workshop where they approach story structure like it's a formula. And if you're a true artist, you tend to resist this because I don't want to write a story that's been written a million times before. I have something really original to say. And while I'm struggling finding it, I don't think I'm going to find it by having somebody at the front of the room kind of deconstruct a masterpiece. And now it's my job to sort of repeat what they think that masterful story writer did. It doesn't work like that. Deconstructing a masterpiece does not now confer that ability onto you. And unfortunately, we often leave that workshop feeling kind of vaguely shamed because I've now been armed with all of this information. And yet, I still don't know how to write a compelling narrative that builds in meaning as it progresses, leading to some kind of transformed state for the protagonist. Okay, and so here's the challenge of creating a really compelling story is how can I marry the wildness of my imagination, which is really the first workshop, to the rigor of story structure, which is what the second workshop is attempting to do. That's the challenge. Okay, this is sort of like the Zen koan of story, because Einstein says you can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created the problem. Well, every story ultimately is about an attempt to take a dramatic problem, take this character as a dramatic problem, like how can I be free? What is justice? How can I find belonging? Some kind of primal desire. And by the end of the story, reframe it. I'll give you an example. Let's say I want freedom and I believe that I will be free when I escape this jail. Makes sense, right? It seems like it's a problem. When I escape, then I'll be free. But when you start to look at it, you start to realize that what makes story compelling is not that the character gets what they want. It's that they reframe their relationship to what they want. If all that happens in your story is your protagonist gets what they want, nobody's going to care. If Jimmy Stewart actually succeeded in leaving Bedford Falls at the end of It's a Wonderful Life, we would want our money back because that's what the story's about. And so this is the difference between character and plot. And this is why writers almost always get stuck. When you write your idea of your story, you will invariably get stuck because story is not about your idea. It's about reframing your idea. It's about understanding the truth beneath your idea. Our idea of our story is never the whole story. It's not that it's incorrect. It's that it's incomplete. And when you start to recognize that what is besetting your protagonist is not a problem, but a dilemma, the truth of the story begins to emerge. I want you to think right now, what is the dilemma besetting my protagonist? I'll give you some examples. So I just gave you the example of freedom. A dilemma is a problem that can't be solved without creating a new problem. Think about that. A dilemma is a problem that can't be solved without creating a new problem. In other words, a dilemma is impossible to solve. You know you've got a story when what your protagonist wants is impossible to achieve based on their current approach. All right, as long as I believe that I can only have a wonderful life when I leave Bedford Falls, I can never, literally never, have a wonderful life. It necessitates a shift in perception. And when you start to recognize the dilemma at the heart of your story or for your protagonist, you are recognizing the source of your story. All right, now I'm going to tell you something else. You're going to notice the two ingredients to a dilemma: powerful desire and a false belief. I'll give you some examples of dilemma, and then I want to unpack how dilemma plays out. So some dilemmas: faith, for example. What's the dilemma of faith? Just pause the video for a second, and I want you to think about this because I want you to find it inside you. It's not up here. Two ingredients to dilemma: powerful desire and a false belief. What's the powerful desire of faith? I want to believe. I want to believe in something. Well, what might be a false belief about the desire to believe in something? When you prove it to me, then I will believe. In other words, what we want is always outside of ourselves. What we need is always within. When you connect to your protagonist's dilemma, you're connecting to the source of your story. Give you another dilemma: intimacy, powerful desire. I want you out there to see me. What's the false belief? Okay, so the false belief is when you see me, then I'll feel warm and fuzzy. What's the dilemma? Well, the dilemma is that I'm afraid that if I show you who I truly am, you might reject me. Do you see how that's universal? So the thing about the dilemma is that it's what makes your story universal. It's personal to your protagonist, but it's universal to your reader. And this is the challenge of story, is making the personal universal. Okay, let's do one more dilemma. If any primal desire is something that is universal to humanity, and when you start to distill that primal desire to its nature, you begin to recognize the dilemma. All right, so the primal desire is your theme: freedom, connection, survival, belonging, meaning, purpose, success. Whatever that primal desire is, notice there's a powerful desire, I want to survive, and there's a false belief. When you recognize the powerful desire and the false belief, you're connecting to the dilemma, and the dilemma is how your story gets activated. It's what creates a narrative drive. How can I survive? Story isn't about will the character survive. Story is about will the character reframe the relationship to what survival means. Because what is the dilemma of survival? Well, think about it. Survival is a terrible long-term life strategy. If you stay in survival mode, what happens? You don't want to live anymore. So do you see how that doesn't make any sense logically? And yet it makes perfect sense on a universal level. You can all relate to that because we're not logical creatures as human beings. We are emotional creatures. Stories are not essays. They're not polemics. They are about the human experience. They're about the thing that unites us all. What makes a novel so compelling? When you read something and you go, how did they know exactly what I was feeling? I thought I was the only one. Isn't this one of the things that makes us turn to story over and over and over again? It's because stories are the most powerful way to explore an idea. All right? What happens when you read a novel and it feels like the author is pushing an agenda? They're trying to tell you what to think or tell you what to feel. You want to throw the book across the room. So what I'm getting at is that there's magic in this process. We're marrying the wildness of our imagination to the rigor of story structure. But if you ever have to choose between your wild imagination and your idea of story structure, you always want to choose your wild imagination because that's going to lead you to the truth of story structure. I always say that writing a novel is an act of faith, but it's not an act of blind faith. You can put your faith in story structure. This is going back to my Margaret Atwood story, is that she is a master of story structure. When you read a great novel, a compelling story, where each subsequent page just pulls you further and further in, you're reading the work of a master storyteller. This isn't something that they did off the cuff. This isn't a first draft. This is somebody who understands how to marry the wildness of her imagination, the rigor of structure. I want to teach you story structure. So I just gave you the quick, broad overview, right? Desire, conflict, surrender, transformation. Those are the 4 key components. I'm not going to go into this video because it'll take way too long, but I do have a lot of free resources you can find at alanwatt.com. We're a writing community. I've got an ebook on story structure. I want to give you a free ebook on dilemma that will really unpack and help you discover the dilemma at the source of your story. Check out alanwatt.com if you're looking for free resources, if you're looking for a writing community. I'm here to support you, and I will talk to you soon.